Okay, so I think we can start. Very, very, very happy to have you all here. Especially, I welcome Robert Glushko. I will introduce him in a moment and very briefly because basically his very talk is about introducing him and his very interesting career in cognitive science. But I also wanted to welcome all of you. I think, Bob, you already have achieved an incredible thing. We have not had that many cognitive scientists in one room before, okay? Really, and I am really amazed. We have representatives of both levels of cognitive science, both the philosophy-based bachelor degree and the master's thesis from psychology. We have students, we have PhD students, we have lecturers, we have staff, and we even have our vice dean. Yes, Emilia, hello. So I'm really, really very happy that this happened. And now let me introduce very, very briefly Bob. I have to say one thing. We even have with us Ilona Tańska, who is from Copernicus Science Center. I don't know, Bob, if you have ever been to Warsaw Copernicus Science Center. If you haven't, you really have to come because this is a wonderful place and we are collaborating. Super. So first, I have to say that this is a part of a lecture series that is enabled by the Train Quiz grant that is located in Human Interactivity and Language Lab. And we have a pleasure today to host Robert Glushko, who is an amazing cognitive scientist himself, but also a supporter of cognitive science in the world. Bob supports more than 25 programs, cognitive science programs, by giving stipends and prizes both to students, to PhD dissertations that you can submit your dissertation or ask your supervisor to submit your dissertation for the famous doctoral Glushko Prize for in the Cognitive Science Society. But even more important, I don't know which one is most important, and I don't want to steal your bread, Bob, but I will say one more thing, that you are also the founder of Rumelhart Prize and Ellman Prize, and those prizes are really great for cognitive science and very, very particular, because one of them is a sort of the recognition of the theoretical achievement within cognitive science that develops this discipline on a theoretical level, which is a sort of a very rare thing to give an award or prize for. And the second one, the Ellman Prize, is for community building within cognitive science, which for a discipline such as this one is a really, really important thing, because this building the community is not easy across disciplines, right? So, Robert, without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's actually very nice to be here because it's the first time I've given a talk where I don't have to explain my name. People always say, what kind of name is that? I say, well, if you see a KO, it means you're Polish or Ukrainian. Well, you're either that or you're a Japanese female like Yoko. So I must be Polish or Ukrainian with a KO. Most people don't understand that orthographic signal. All right, next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is basically my biography. I was PhD from UC San Diego with my thesis advisor was David Rumelhart. It was a seminal figure in cognitive science. And since then, I followed a very opportunistic or untraditional career, which I'm going to talk about today. And I've touched on a number of different fields, but they're all at the core cognitive science in the wild, in the real world. And so I'm going to be telling you about that trajectory in this talk. And again, feel free to ask questions and someone just interrupt me and then we'll talk, because I don't want, my slides are very detailed because I want you to be able to listen rather than just take notes. So I'm not going to read my slides, but I want them to be there as a something you can look at later. Next slide, please. So again, I've been told many times that I have this, I don't know, crazy career. And I think I've learned some things that are worth talking about that no one else can tell you, because I've been in almost every possible part of cognitive science in terms of career fields. And I'm going to talk about career lessons. I'm going to use the concepts of trajectories and vectors to help you see some lessons about cognitive science in the world. Next slide. So trajectory is a word often used to talk about careers, as if there's somehow the path that you follow that's just started by some force when you first start, and you just sort of follow that trajectory. But that ignores the fact that often you're affected by vectors that come in and change your direction. And I've had a number of vectors which significantly changed the trajectory of my career. So I'm going to give you some of these episodes, and then at each point talk about how I thought about these vectors and trajectories when it happened, and then how I think about it now, decades later, as I look in the rearview mirror, as I'm about to write my autobiography and retire or something. Next slide. But let me give you the summary now of the important lessons. There's been a number of times when I took a job that I didn't expect to take, but it turned out to be really a good idea, because I always tried to have the rule that says, take a job where you can learn something, where you can be successful, even if it's not the one you thought you wanted at the time. You have to be opportunistic if possibilities arise, but you also have to be careful and do some due diligence, because it may not look below the surface the way it looked at the surface. And so there have been a couple of times when I made mistakes because I didn't look below the surface. I saw a great job on the surface and jumped at it, but I didn't look closely enough to what was really going to be happening at that job. So that meant that I had some failures. But when things turn out worse than you expect, you don't want to wallow in your misery. You want to say, you know what, I'm moving on. And a phrase I learned says, if you don't win, you don't lose. If you don't win, you learn. So take failures as learning experiences. On the other extreme, there have been times when my career turned out way better than I expected, but I didn't want to gloat about it. I want to say, look, I was lucky. So take advantage of luck, but just be grateful and move on. Give the world back when you're lucky. Don't think you deserved it. And the biggest lesson is to say, learn to look at your life in an abstract way so you can reuse your experience. That's one of the big ideas that says you want to be able to look at your world life and say, raise the level of abstraction, how I understand it and how I communicate it. So I'll do a lot of that today as well. Next slide. So basically, I'm going to talk about, I think, about 10 different episodes in my career as an applied cognitive scientist, starting with my time as a PhD student at UC San Diego. I then went to Bell Laboratories in an applied research area in the Bell system. I then spent a very short time in a research center started by a computer company called Sperry Corporation, which I then left after 3 months, reason I'll tell you in a minute. I then moved to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to Carnegie Mellon University, working at a brand new idea called the Software Engineering Institute, which was, I learned a lot, but again, it was in the wrong place. I had to go back to Atlanta. Next slide. So I joined a consulting firm in Atlanta called Search Technology, which I liked, but I traveled too much. So I went out on my own as an independent consultant. And then one of my consulting projects turned into a company, totally opportunistic. I hadn't expected it, but it happened and I took advantage of it. And it was very successful for several years until it blew up. Boom, almost overnight, my company blew up for reasons I'll tell you about. So I shifted. The word we use now in Silicon Valley is called pivot, which is English for fail and start over, I think. We pivoted, which means we failed and started over. And I started another company, which was very, very successful. Next slide. And so my company got acquired. We had a very successful IPO in 1999, which changed my life and changed cognitive science, that event. But after a while, I didn't like that and I left and I retired as a professor to Berkeley. I was going to be there one semester and I've been there 20 years for reasons I'll tell you. So that's in a nutshell my crazy career. Next slide. I love this slide because I look like this young punk kid. I love it. This is me in 1979 with my thesis advisor, David Rumelhart, and my other advisor, Jay McClelland. Both names you should know. Jay McClelland is a professor at Stanford in cognitive psychology, very famous for a lot of reasons, well-deserved. Dave Rumelhart is probably not as famous as he should be for reasons that are really unfortunate, which is that he died prematurely of a degenerative brain disease. But he was very important in my career, and I'll talk a lot about that. Next slide. So my best work as a graduate student was this. It basically was about the level of knowledge you have when you read words you've never seen before. And the question was, do you use rules of spelling to sound, or do you remember the pattern? And I basically showed that those were logically incompatible possibilities, because how would you know that you didn't know the word unless you looked it up? So we use a lot of activation of knowledge in addition to spelling to sound patterns at the local level to pronounce new words. What this really taught me was about text processing. I learned to like reading and text processing. And next slide. So I thought I was going to be a professor, like many of you might think. And I applied for a job at the University of Texas Linguistics Department, which was trying to hire an applied phonologist, they called it. And that's what my work was, applied phonology. And they loved me, half of them. And they told me, oh, we're going to give you the job. Let's go out to dinner and have a party and celebrate your new job and stuff. And I went home really excited. And then I got a call saying, we can't hire you because the linguists in the department refused to hire a cognitive psychologist. This is not going to happen. So I was just crushed. And then David Rumelhart took me aside and said, Bob, you were going to go to a place where half of them wanted you to fail? You want to go someplace where people want you to be successful. And so I was able to, next slide, I was able to overcome a real devastation about not getting a job I thought I wanted. And looking back, it was like, I'm so lucky. People would have been there trying to make me unsuccessful. So I looked at this as the most important turning point in my career, not going into the academy after graduate school. And I know a lot of people want to do that. A lot of people now say, no, I want to go to industry. But the point was, it's a decision you have to make. And you want to be successful. So choose a job where you can be successful, not just the job that looks like when you always thought you wanted. So next slide. So the first major decision I had to make was, what do I do instead of getting an academic job? And I went to a place called Bell Labs, which was the most important and supportive workplace on the planet in 1979. There were more PhDs working at Bell Laboratories in 1979 than the entire University of California system. You know, we're talking Berkeley, UCLA, San Diego, all those schools together had fewer PhDs than Bell Labs had. Next slide. That's because Bell Labs was hiring a lot of people like me, because they were ahead of the curve saying, you know, we have a lot of complex systems that run the telephone system, a lot of complex technology. We need to hire people who can help us make sure that works for users, for the people who use it. As they were like inventing a lot of human-computer interaction in 1979. They were also famous for all sorts of research. Bell Labs invented the laser, the transistor, the mobile telephone, and a lot of other things, because it had a system for doing that. AT&T, the parent company, that basically said, we want to be an idea factory. In fact, there's a book called The Idea Factory. Can you see this? Yes? No? All right. The Idea Factory was basically the idea that there was an innovation system at Bell Labs that said how to optimize the transfer of science and technology innovation into the operating companies of the Bell system. Next slide. So the basic idea was that Bell Labs said, consciously, there's this spectrum from pure research, inventing the laser and the transistor, and understanding the Big Bang and things like that, to applied research, to development, to making products, to running the Bell system. And they had every possible step on that continuum. And you had like predefined handoffs. Who would you work with to get to the next step, to make sure your stuff went to the right place? And so I joined an organization called Applied Research and Network Systems, because I thought it would be a good place to do research where I could build real stuff that made a difference in the world, while still doing work on text processing and reading. That was my PhD thesis work. And I was encouraged, like all of Bell Labs was, to say, let's solve a problem that was 10 years out and prevent it from being a problem. So predict the future and then prevent it from being bad. And that's a really nice kind of job description. And so what it meant was that next slide, I spent a few weeks after getting to Bell Labs, and I went around with the guys in the trucks fixing problems in the phone company. When things would break, I'd go out there and fix things. The cables would get leaky and there'd be faults, or phones would stop working, or there'd be a switching failure. And I would go out there with these guys and they'd fix them. And in fact, I still have that hard hat that I don't know if you can see this, but I still have the hat. Do you see my hat?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my hat. I used to go around with the guys in the trucks. And I learned by watching them that they had this real problem. They would have a complex problem they had to fix, and they'd have to find some adjustment in some technology or some software. They had to look through these thousands of pages of technical manuals saying, it's in here somewhere, it's in here somewhere. And I thought, I can make this more efficient. So next slide. So I spent several years at Bell Labs inventing ebooks, basically, to put these documents in an electronic form so you could interact with them and search them and stuff, and replace these inefficient paper systems with electronic document systems. So I helped invent what we might call ebooks today. And again, an important part of Bell Labs was that they wanted people to interact with the people in the world who did stuff and help them figure out ways to make it better. And that's an important thing, because that's the challenge we have now. I mean, one of the big questions in AI now is, will AI make the world better, or will it make the world worse? And how you think of that problem will make a big difference in what turns out. So I'll do a little aside here. So another part of my organization in my laboratory did a very interesting thing, an expert system, which was, we don't use that word anymore, but what it means is symbolic AI, rule-based AI. And they built a system they called automated cable expertise. And they said, let's talk to these people that fix things in the Bell system and find out what they know, so we can help them predict problems and do preventive maintenance. Great idea. It was going to be a lot more effective than waiting until things fail and then fix them. Predict the failure points and then prevent them from failing. The problem was, by calling it automated cable expertise, the workers thought they were being insulted. They said, you're trying to replace us. Automated cable expertise, that means you don't need us anymore. You want to put us in a box and don't need us. They refused to use this system. So they had to change the name. They said, oh, let's call it apprentice to cable expert. Now, it was exactly the same ACE, but now it's a positive thing. We want to help you out. We're your understudy. We're augmenting your intelligence rather than replacing you. And the system was a very successful system. There's a very important lesson there about the politics or the sociology of AI that's relevant today. You know, you got to recognize that your job is not to replace people, it's to augment people as a cognitive scientist. So don't let the AI people screw this up. You know, our job is to make it augmentation rather than automation. Next slide. But another big idea that came out of this time was to say, you know what? We are doing document automation. We're putting documents online, but we're doing something bigger than that. We're saying, how do you build documents alongside of software systems? We have to make documents like software. So we said, gee, documents have source files. They get compiled, they get revised, they get distributed, they get built. We said, let's invent document management by treating documents like software. So we basically invented the first document management systems by applying this idea from software to the idea of documents. Again, this idea about abstracting the problem so you can attack it in a bigger, more robust way. So that was the first major point of my career at Bell Labs, where I learned about this kind of career spectrum from research to development. But I also learned, next slide, that there's another vector, another dimension of that space, which is whether you're in a for-profit environment or a non-profit environment. So we can use this, I'm going to use this chart as the cognitive science career space for the remainder of this talk, to talk about different places that you can go and where I've been to explore your cognitive science career. Next slide. So for example, if you're in the university, you're over there in the nonprofit basic research end. You go to a startup company, you're in sort of a applied research, advanced development, but you're in a profit sector. A mature firm will have much more operational kind of orientation. And something like gov.pl, which is something I learned about last week, really interesting thing you have in your country. Basically, it's the digital services portal for Poland. And you go there to get all your business forms and licenses and everything else. And that's the place where people who are cognitive scientists are making a difference. They're saying, let's build systems and services that people can use effectively online. So you're working in a nonprofit sector doing advanced development and product deployment. So again, 4 very different places in this space, and you can view your career trajectory as movement in this space, and you can ask yourself, am I making a big movement or a small movement? How big of a chance am I taking? Am I going right next door is easy. The other side of the spectrum is very hard. So you can think of it as sort of a map of your career and possibilities in your career. Next slide. So I was at Bell Labs for about 5 or 6 years, and all of a sudden, it blew up. In 1984, the U.S. government broke up AT&T as part of an antitrust settlement. Like we're having now, Google's in trouble now for the same reason, too much of a monopoly. The government said, maybe we should break up Google into parts that's not a monopoly. Well, Bell Labs got broken up out of AT&T. They took all the phone companies and made them separate companies. All of a sudden, Bell Labs lost its customers and its primary funding support. So they're saying, well, what are we going to do now? Well, I don't know. We'll just figure it out. And so there was this chaos for like 2 years. And during that chaos, a company called Spirit Corporation, which was a computer manufacturer, said, let's go poach some of the Bell Labs people to start a new little mini Bell Labs in Atlanta called Software Technology Research Center. And I thought, you know what? I came to Bell Labs from San Diego. I moved from Southern California to Northern New Jersey. They have winter there. It's cold. It snows a lot. I didn't like that very much. So I said, I can move to Atlanta where it's hot and sunny and they're going to give me a big raise. It's like, I'm there. So let's move there. Next slide. So I decided to go to Atlanta and take this job in Atlanta. It's going to be great. Double my salary, you know, better weather. But I didn't look very carefully at this opportunity. So I went down there, we bought a house, we moved to Atlanta, moved in, and I got to Atlanta in the last week of May in 1986. I moved into my house. My first day at work was going to be the following Monday, June 2nd. Friday morning, next slide. Open up the newspaper, and I discovered that Spirit Corporation has been wiped off the earth. Burroughs Corporation has just had a hostile takeover and taken over the company I was going to go work for on Monday. I'm going, you got to be kidding. Do I have a job? I mean, again, I joined the company. I was going to start the company 3 days later, and all of a sudden it's gone. It's gone. Next slide. So I thought, oh, it's going to be a great opportunity. Well, then overnight it became a terrible opportunity. And within 3 months, they said, well, we can either quit or you can move back to Pennsylvania where we have a research lab in the Burroughs Corporation. I said, I'm going to move back to New Jersey. I hated New Jersey. I hated the winter. So I was stuck. Now, I learned something there. I should have learned it better about doing due diligence. But, you know, I had this great opportunity on paper. It was turned out to be a terrible opportunity. So what did I do? I'm living in Atlanta. I have a brand new house. I have no job. I got to find a job. So next slide. Fortunately, the headhunters were circling Sperry like they circled Bell Labs, and I got recruited for a job very much like the one I thought I was going to get at Sperry. So it was a place called the Software Engineering Institute at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, a world-class computer science program. The US government had this idea that we should take the best computer science department that we can find and hire people with industry R&D experience to help them transfer these new ideas in computer science to the software world, especially that part that worked for the government. And so I was going to be a director of technology transfer, to be that kind of glue that Bell Labs had to take things from the computer science researchers at Carnegie Mellon and help them get them into the software industry. And, you know, next slide. You know, it looked like I hadn't needed a job. It looked okay. So I'm going to do this. And they offered to let me commute between Pittsburgh and Atlanta, fly back and forth every week to well, I figured out my life, which was terrible. But I learned a bunch in retrospect. So while it was a hard year, I learned a bunch of stuff which became really useful to me in my next career after that. Next slide. In particular, I learned something which is really, really useful that was called the capability maturity model. And this is an approach that the SEI developed for how to do their job of how to help research and applied research get into the real world. How do you get companies to adopt new technology, usually software, effectively to make them more productive? And so this framework analyzes that migration to a better place with better technology in terms of two dimensions of process maturity and technology maturity, often which are uncorrelated. So next slide. You can think there being a map of a company's capabilities. It says, you want to get here where you have advanced technology with effective process in the upper right corner here. You want to get there, but you say, where are you now? How do we figure out where you are now so we can help you figure out how to get there? And so it's a general way of thinking about your capabilities on both process and technology dimensions, so you can know where to fix things to be able to adopt better technology. And what's interesting is that, of course, how you get there depends on where you are. So, for example, if you are what I call next slide, an S. Can you imagine what an S culture is? A process-intensive, low-technology culture. We call it the suits culture. This is a company that has a lot of effective processes, but they're not very technologically oriented. They're suits, okay? So if they want to adopt more powerful technology, they have to recognize that they have to kind of slow down their optimization efficiency crusades in order to kind of get rough for a while they adopt new technology. They have to get worse for a while to get better. That's the way you get there from high process, low technology culture. Next slide. On the other hand, if you are a J culture, a genes culture, very technology sophisticated, but not very process oriented, you can adopt better processes, but you often have to use simpler technology for a while you get there. Next slide. Now, what's important here is that this is a general idea. You can think about this as, how do I get someplace I want to go from where I am today? I mean, I want to get better at doing something. Is my challenge technological or is it process? Am I a kind of person that says I can make anything work? I'm a geek. I can learn any technology overnight. Or am I a person who's really good at systematizing and organizing and process? We're different kinds of people. I'm more of an S than a J, for example. That's why I read books on organizing. Okay. So, but you can ask this question abstractly and say, how do I look at some attempt to improve some situation, bring technology in, bring AI in, okay? Are my challenges going to be technological or methodological? So that's a big lesson I learned that I applied for the next 25 years of my career. Next slide. So again, I was in Pittsburgh. I didn't like living in Pittsburgh. I couldn't stand the commute, so I decided I had to move back to Atlanta. So I lucked out, and I found a consulting firm in Atlanta, headed by a Georgia Tech professor named Bill Rouse. He said, you know, you're an interesting dude. You have done some interesting things. I like your experience at Bell Labs and at the SEI. Why don't you see if you can just apply that stuff to a new consulting practice? I thought, this passes the Rumelhart test. He supports me, says I can do what I want to do that will be to be successful. So I joined his company, and within a year, I had adapted my Bell Labs R&D on digital publishing and the SEI capability maturity process to develop a consulting practice on helping people become electronic publishers. So I'd go into a company and say, let's make you adopt digital publishing. What do we need to do to make that possible in your company? So I do assessments and ask them questions about what they were good and bad at and stuff. And we built the company around that. Next slide. I mean, it was really successful. I mean, I went through kind of, well, I got to get a job, but I traveled a lot, but I loved it. I learned a whole bunch of stuff about consulting and how to build an effective practice in technology adoption. which is, of course, what a lot of people, startups are all about. Can you get people to adopt your stuff successfully? So I had this very different background where I spent consulting time, theoretical consulting, technology transfer kind of research at the SCI is now the essence of the consulting practice. Next slide. So again, I had a lot of fun in search technology. One of my things I did was exactly what I just said about merging the technology and methodology. So I developed something I called hypertext engineering, which was a methodology for saying, how do you take a printed book and make it into a digital book? What are the technology questions? What are the methodology process kind of questions? And this became my slogan for my consulting practice called hypertext engineering. Next slide. So again, what I learned at this company was what I call the secrets of consulting, which again is a generalized thing. How do you, an effective consulting is how do you get people to do what you want them to do? That's what consulting is about. You have to learn to generalize and systematize your knowledge so you can teach it, market, and sell it. But the best way to do that is not to do what you've done over and over again. That's boring. You don't learn anything. The way to do it is to do something which is slightly different than what you've done before. So you have to push yourself to be more abstract, to be more analytic about the situation you're getting into. That way you will learn things. You extend your knowledge base to be more abstract. But what's really important, and I cannot stress this enough, is who are you selling to as a consultant? You're selling to a checkbook. There's someone in the room you're trying to sell to who is the person who's paying for the project. They may be the executive sponsor of some organization who's going to say, yes, I want to hire this company or this person to do this project. That's the checkbook. The person you don't want to focus on is what we call the gatekeeper. There's someone in the room who is this technical smart person who says they're there at the request of the checkbook to assess whether you can help them or not. Are you smart enough to help them do this project they have? And it's easy to get sucked into or seduced into trying to impress that person, but their job is to keep you out. So you want to impress them enough, but don't focus on them. Focus on the checkbook. You got to impress the checkbook. What are the business objectives of the checkbook, not the technical constraints or assessment of the gatekeeper? Next slide. So I love this. I was a consultant. I went all over the country doing projects with different kinds of companies, helping them become electronic publishers. But this was the pre-Zoom time. You actually had to go places to do this. So I spent half my time on airplanes, flying to Ohio, flying to Michigan, flying to San Francisco, flying to Los Angeles. It's like, how am I doing it again? I'm traveling again. I'm supposed to learn that lesson. Don't travel so much. It's killing your family. So I said, I'm going to basically go out on my own as an independent consultant to have only 1 or 2 clients at a time rather than 5 or 10. I could travel less. Next slide. So I did that. I started a company called Hypertext Engineering, me as the sole consultant. And I had a great client at Silicon Graphics. That's the company that invented the kind of great graphics technology, first saw on things like Terminator. And we helped them become electronic publishers. And the last day of the project, I thought, I'm having my lunch with the checkbook, thanking me for making the project so successful. And he said, Bob, I'm going to start a company with you that does this stuff for everybody else in Silicon Valley. It's a big business opportunity. Everyone wants to move to digital publishing. Let's start a company that does it. I said, okay, great. I was just too eager. So I said, sure. I ended up spending, became a founder of a company called Passage Systems, how to make the passage to digital publishing. But it meant 4 more years of commuting between the Bay Area and the East Coast. Next slide. So here, for example, this kind of work we did. Build the publishing process and the publishing technology for a company that would enable them to make this transition from basically, we have thousands of pages of printed manuals and printed documentation done in very kind of traditional word processing ways, having a document database with data models and transforms and automated the whole process to be able to have a production system at scale. Really successful company. We did Sybase, Tandem, Borland, Intel, Hitachi, Cisco. Half the Valley was my clients in the early 1990s. I thought we were on top of the world. Next slide. And we were. I learned a ton. We did some really cool stuff. We had the world's best consultants in document process evolution. We did what I called document engineering. which is a combination of what I'm called document anthropology and document archaeology, two core cognitive science skills. How do you understand and redesign information-centric processes? Next slide. So document anthropology. You go into a company and you observe the natives doing their work. How are they using information? How are they creating information? Who do they talk to? Who do they send information to? Who do they get information from? But they may be hiding some things. They may have some things they're doing for political reasons or other reasons. So you have to become an archaeologist and you dig into the back what they're actually doing. What have they done in the past? Can you find those hidden documents? And do those documents conform what they say they're doing now? Have things changed over time? So once you found the actual documents people are using and creating, and they actually run their business, then you do analysis called document engineering. Take the documents apart and build the semantic components of them. So you can rethink them and make them more abstract and more robust so you can reuse them in different contexts. So you're basically building a new document model which can handle all the use cases of the information that they're going to have. And that was, again, it was a really exciting time to be able to rethink this problem of migrating from print to online, using everything I learned from consulting and capability model. We had a product I called Bob in the Box. You go to a trade show and people would ask 10 questions at the counter and it would generate a report saying, here's what you should do. I said, we can do this in 10 seconds. What can we do? What can we do in a week? $100,000 and we'll fix your company. It was great. Bob in the Box. However, next slide. Our work was very consulting heavy. You know, we come in there and charge them $500,000 over a couple month project to do all this re-engineering and assessments and stuff. And that was great until it wasn't. The web came along in like 1995, and all of a sudden people said, why should we pay you guys $500,000 to do all this re-engineering consultant hooey stuff where we can have our engineers just make web pages? I said, no. Our engineers, they're not trained writers, they're not trained user-oriented people. They really write English sentences, let alone write documents for users. Yeah, but it's cheap. And tech pubs is an overhead business. We have them write web pages while the code is compiling. It doesn't cost anything. I said, no. But the problem was no one would pay for us anymore. We should have said, okay, we're going to pivot to be a little bit more simpler system, simpler software that's configurable rather than customizable, less consulting heavy. But I had some people in the company saying, that would be wrong. HTML is stupid. We don't want to touch it, stupid. And everyone else said, we're going to quit and go to a web startup and get stock options. So my company blew up. And the problem was, you can't be two things. So if you can either be a consulting company and charge big bucks for careful, long work, or you can be a software company and sell the same thing over and over again. You can't be both. They're incompatible business models. I learned that the hard way. Next slide. So again, at the beginning, I thought, I'm going to be an entrepreneur in Silicon Valley. Is that amazing or what? And for the first couple of years, it was great. We invented neat stuff. We grew some stuff. We did great things. We became profitable. I was traveling too much, but all of a sudden, overnight, the web killed us. Boom. Because people wouldn't want to pay for this consulting heavy stuff. So I had to pivot. Okay. Again, pivot means fail and start over. Next slide. But again, the next slide said, let's take the survivors from Passage and start another company, which we call Veo. Veo is Spanish for I see or I get it, because I got it now. And let's do the stuff we did for Passage, but do it in a different domain. Instead of doing technical manuals, let's do the documents needed to do business-to-business commerce transactions. Instead of building a really high-end, complex, configurable software stuff, let's build a platform which is standards-based, which is much more configurable rather than customizable. And that's where I learned, I learned from my failure. I learned a ton by failing to Passage systems. And then by a miracle, that same year, I started Veo. My wife got a job at Berkeley, and all of a sudden I lived in the same time zone as my wife for the first time in 20 years. Next slide. So this is the kind of work I did there. We built the first business-to-business marketplace platform. Instead of having everybody have a copy of the catalog they want to buy and sell from on their computer. Let's put the catalog in the cloud. Have a marketplace that's shared by everybody and have standard business documents that go in and out of the cloud. What a great idea. We invented web services. Next slide. So basically we said a business model like this, which is what Amazon does. You have a catalog. Customers look at the catalog. They choose things from the catalog, create an order. It goes to the warehouse. We have that stuff. It goes to the bank. Does this person can afford to pay for this stuff? Sure, let's deliver it to them. So a business model is basically a choreography of information exchanges. What is the document dance, we used to call it? And how does the documents dance? In tune? Next slide. They dance in tune because they have overlapping semantics. The glue of the document choreography is overlapping things like who is the customer? What is the address? You know, these little pieces of information glue processes together. It's a big idea in general. A lot of business processes, information intensive. Find the glue. Find the glue, that information that glues the processes together. That's the cognitive science in the wild question. Find the information glue. Next slide. So, somewhat more sober the second time in my startup. I'm smarter, more realistic the second time. We're inventing new stuff, and all of a sudden, my God, we are going to be bought by a company as the future to their IPO. Next slide. I mean, we went public in the summer of 1999, the absolute peak of what was called the internet bubble at the time. 6 months later, I was able to sell my insider stock that I paid 1 cent a share for as a founder. 1 cent a share for my stock. I'm almost embarrassed to tell you I sold it for $600 a share. That's 6 million% in 4 years. Not a bad return on my investment as an entrepreneur. I got more than I deserved. Next slide. Which is why I can fund all these prizes. So again, I'm going to announce today that as of today, I'm going to fund a prize at the University of Warsaw in cognitive science that will enable your 2 programs, both the undergraduate program and the master's program, to award some student, probably who's in the room right now or on the Zoom call, a $500 prize in each program for the best honors work of some other dimension that your faculty will figure out how to evaluate. But there'll be 2 prizes starting in the spring of 2024 for the University of Warsaw. So, whoopee. Again, it's like, I tell myself, I didn't deserve this kind of money. The money was, I figured I would get some, but I got 10 or 20 times more than I expected. So, you know, why not make the world a better place? And so that's what I try to do in cognitive science. Next slide. And so again, we invented a lot of foundational technology for business-to-business marketplace and supply chains. Our natural customers were telephone companies. But again, I knew a lot about telephone companies, how they worked, because they do a lot of basically routing and switching of communication, which is what a marketplace network does too. But I was an engineering director, but I also could explain this because I invented a lot of the core ideas. So I basically had 2 jobs. I was basically an engineering director building the XML technology and standards and helping the Salesforce sell stuff and joining standards bodies to help bless it and make our stuff standard. Next slide. So it was insane. Between 1998 and 2001, I made like 20 international trips. And I thought, this is insane. I went to Beijing 3 times in 3 years, Berlin twice in 2 years, Tokyo 3 times, London twice, Hong Kong twice. And I said, you know what? I thought I learned this lesson. Why do I keep getting myself on airplanes and flogging myself to death on travel? Next slide. So I walked into my boss in the summer of 2001 and said, I quit. She said, you can't quit. You're symbolically important. You're a founder. I said, I quit. She said, no, you can't. I said, I quit. She said, you can't. I said, I quit. So after 10 of these, she stopped. There was this pause. She said, I'll tell you what. As of today, you're the engineering fellow of Commerce One. I said, what does that mean? She goes, I have no idea, but does it sound pretty cool? Sure. So I became the engineering fellow. They paid me minimum wage for 20 hours a week, which is the minimum they could pay me to keep me on this payroll. Kept me on the org chart. And I came to work once a month and waved. Hi there, hi there. And I retired. Next slide. For all of 1 month. I wasn't have to travel anymore, didn't work all the time, but I got bored to death in 1 month. And so within a month, my wife, who was at Berkeley, a professor, helped. One of her friends said, you should teach a class in e-business here. You're a natural person. You're a technology executive on leave. You're perfect. People would love you here. So I said, okay, my retirement lasts 1 month. I thought I was going to have to work-life balance. No, go back to work all the time. But I realized in retrospect that, it's better to do something interesting and challenging than to sit around and do nothing. So I went back to work full time, and when you don't need a job, you have to work hard at it. So next slide. So again, the biggest problem moving to Berkeley was that the university works so slowly. I was used to saying, I got to make a deal today or I don't make payroll next Friday. Now it's like, let's have a committee and a task force and a committee and a task force to study the task force and the committee for next year. I hated that stuff at Berkeley. I refused to do it. And I said, I'm going to quit in a semester, so I'm not going to have a lab. I'm not going to build students. I'm going to sit in the corner like a philosophy professor and write books. They said, fine. So I have the freedom to do what I want. And whenever I get bored, I start something else. I've taught 15 different courses in 20 years because I keep getting bored and I start new courses. And someday I'll retire, but apparently not yet. So, for example, at Berkeley, next slide, I've done things like this. I said, psychology people study stupid things in the laboratory about concept formation, but the real world has like, 1 billion people using Facebook and Instagram and, tagging things. We should study that kind of stuff rather than just laboratory experiments. So I started pushing this idea that categorization is in the real world, not just in a laboratory. And this paper has had some impact, I think, because of that. Next slide. I wrote this book in 2005 that tried to say, let me abstract my experience from these two different kinds of things, the two ends of my startup, the publishing end and the transactional end. There's a unified theory called document engineering that helps you understand the semantics, whether you're on the publishing or transactional end. Next slide. And then I said, let me abstract again. This is about organization of information, but about organization of everything. So I said, you know what? Organizing is not just computer science and library science. It's also law and business and linguistics and economics. This was organize the world. So let's write a book about the core idea of organizing and then have like a layer, like an onion around it, onion skin that has 500 footnotes that are tagged by discipline. So I had this kind of fractal book that was fun to write called The Discipline of Organizing. It says, organizing is a design problem. What questions do you have to answer? It's been a very successful book. It was Information Science Book of the Year in 2015. It's used in 100 schools in 20 countries, probably in Poland somewhere. But I got bored. Next slide. So last year I wrote a book for kids. I got invited by someone who said, I'm the head of gifted and talented kids, 5th and 6th graders at this fancy school district in Princeton, New Jersey. Will you teach your book? I said, yeah, right. He holds my book and said, okay, you know my book. So I wrote a book for kids to help them become more organized. This, by the way, is my granddaughter's bedroom before and after I beat her up and taught her to organize her bedroom. So again, the idea was, let me abstract my knowledge once again and go from teaching business process for publishing to organizing more generally, and then even to organizing for kids. Next slides. So again, I came back to Berkeley thinking that it was fun. I'll try this out for a while. And I kept telling myself, one more semester, I'll retire. But I'm enjoying it too much. I have fun to go back and forth, and I still advise students, and I still invest in startups and the companies and so on, and I still invent new courses. And so why quit? So next slide. So again, I didn't overly plan my career. I had to be opportunistic. That's a really good lesson. Your first job is your first job. Doesn't have to be the perfect one. Just find one where you can learn and be successful, where people want you to be successful. And when an opportunity arises, you should ask yourself, well, is this worth taking? Of course, it's going to be risky, but is it going to be a possible upside? And so unless it has a really bad downside, like excessive travel, and the company's about to get taken over next week, you should accept it. Why not? Next slide. But again, sometimes you'll fail. Don't beat yourself to death. You learn something, move on. And sometimes if you get more than you expected, don't gloat. Don't expect it to happen the next time. Just use what you learned for good and move on. And finally, yeah, there's an illusion that you can retire someday and have work-life balance, but whenever you reinvent yourself, you learn stuff. It keeps you from burning out. So it's always better to be doing something rather than nothing. Next slide. So let me summarize. This is where I started, the lower left corner, as a PhD student. Next slide. I moved to Bell Labs, a for-profit applied research organization. Next slide. I moved to the SEI to help transition research into practice. Next slide. Oh, sorry, I skipped one. That was fine. The previous one was Sperry for 3 months. Yeah. Yeah, this is me going back to the SEI now after Sperry failed. Now I'm in a nonprofit, trying to do technology transfer in a nonprofit context. Next slide. Then I started a company because I went to the consulting firm to start my practice in consulting using the SEI's lesson. Next slide. I started my own firm. Now I'm responsible entirely for the profit of the company. Now it's just me. Next slide. Then we got bought, and I went to my startup. No, so then I went to my startup, doing applied research for profit. Next slide. My second startup was even more researchy. Next slide, I got bought. Now we're back to product side. And then I quit. Next slide. And I'm back at the university. So I'm back where I started after 40 years. So I think there's one more slide. Is that right? Is there one more slide?
The last one.
That's the last one? You don't have the picture of me and Lech Walesa?
Let's try to dig it out. And in the meantime, we will ask you questions, okay?
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. All right. Okay.
Thank you.
Any questions?
So while we are looking for the beautiful picture of you and Lech Walesa, let's take some questions. Before we start, maybe I just wanted to share this reflection that I never thought you can make a business with something as abstract as text, language, and general systems organization. And that was a beautiful lesson, really, about abstracting. It was amazing. And then at the same time, I really loved about your talk that you always stayed close to your family, and your family was in the center. And that's something that you very rarely hear from, those big entrepreneurs that make zillions of dollars and then they never mention their families, which is really beautiful that you did.
Well, it was a struggle to try to keep my family together. It didn't entirely work all the time, but I told myself I wanted to actually be home once in a while. And I spent so much time on airplanes. Again, I spent 21 international trips in 3 years. That's insane. That's insane. Okay, there's a question.
So first, the picture of the Lech Walesa or the question? What do you prefer?
Well, there's Lech Walesa and I met Lech Walesa on a cruise ship. I did this cruise once. It was called the Baltic Cruise. You get on the boat in St. Petersburg and you zigzag across the Baltic to Helsinki, to Tallinn, to Copenhagen, to Riga, and you take a bus to Vilnius, and you go back to Gdansk, and then you go back to Copenhagen. That was this cruise ship. Well, Lech Walesa gets on the boat in Riga, and he became a little tour guide for a couple of days, telling us stories about Poland and everything else. He took us to the shipyard at Gdansk and everything else. And then the last day, his handler said, he looked at the people on the boat, and you're the one person he wants to talk to because of your name. So we talked about all four of my grandparents came from a little village in the Carpathians, which is now just west of the Poland-Ukraine border. And we talked about, Poland and everything else. It was fun. So that's my picture with Lech. But he basically made money going on cruise ships. I don't know if you knew that. He was a cruise ship, lecturer.
Yeah.
Did a retirement gig, yes.
There's a question on the chat. I don't know if you can see it or we can read it to you.
Read it to me. Read it to me. It's easy to read.
mentioned at the beginning about predicting and solving future challenges in the 1990s problem. What are the 2030s challenges in your opinion for Coxside?
Oh, it's very clear. It's basically, will AI destroy the world or not? Basically, it's like, again, are we going to augment or are we going to automate? Again, that really comes down to what problems are you trying to solve, and how are you trying to solve them, and how you treat the people in the solution. So again, the example about the expert system, ACE. Are you automating cable expertise, or are you an apprentice to a cable expert? Very different spin. Very different. I mean, think about it. You want that job. You want a system to help you do your job better. But you want to be automated away? No. So the way that the people in Bell Labs framed the solution had a profound effect on how it was adopted. And that's the challenge. The people that do the computer science, they just want to do the algorithms. The cognitive science, the people have to beat the brakes on this and say, there's people involved, there's people involved, there's people involved. Don't forget the people involved. That's the big challenge of the next decade, I think. Don't let the AI people get rid of the people.
Yep, very. I think it's a good idea for you to come here and ask a question in front of the microphone, so you can do it yourself. It's great.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, I'm not the subject expert, but my work area is history of science and a little bit of philosophy. So I want to ask you, is it a concern raising only by the AI expert that this is going to be a big disruption the way we work and the human being work? This is general. And another question is that when human being started to settle started to go for sedentary lifestyle, there's a big change happen the way they think about the natural world, physical world, social world. Is it also going to be a big leap forward as cognitive AI comes in, cognitive science? Do you think that is there is going to be a big change in the way we think about the world? Cognitive capacity is going to be change in a significant way? Yes.
I understand the question, because the course I'm currently teaching at Berkeley is called Sense Making and Organizing. And I ask the students, how do you discover or impose structure on all your experience? As an individual, we call it philosophy and psychology. If you're in a group, we call it language and culture. If you're in an institutional setting, we call it laws and standards and regulation. If there's data, we call it science. But the big idea is look at the world around you. Make sense of the world around you. And too many of my students walk around the campus with their phones in their face. And so they don't see the world at all. And so I'll have a lecture where I'll walk in and say, here are 20 names of things, 10 of which are trees. Can you name the trees out of these 20 names? And they go, half of them, they get like 5 of them right out of 20. And then I'll say, here are 10 pictures of trees. Can you name them? They get 5 out of 10. And I say, every one of these trees within a quarter mile of this lecture hall. You've never noticed that tree enough to wonder what name it is? I don't know. And so I say to people, well, maybe it's not instrumental because you don't have to eat the tree, but you still should care about the world around you so you can make sense of your experiences. And so I try to raise this consciousness about the world's organized, the world has structure. How do you discover and impose structure and everything? And I think that's a real opportunity, because right now I have a really bad habit. Whenever I walk around and I see somebody pushing a stroller with a baby and a phone in their face, I go crazy. I go, you person, you're going to make your kids stupid. Put the phone down and show them the animals and the birds and the trees and stuff and the flowers. It's like you're making your kid into an idiot. Because they are doing things, they're training the kid not to care about the physical and natural environment. And so those are going to be survival skills to be an effective human being. If there's a lot of technology everywhere, then the social skills would be more important. So let's learn to develop those social skills, those sense-making skills. So yeah, it's a great question. And I think that the challenge is to recognize that technology has always changed. The printing press changed everything. The VCR changed everything. The player piano changed everything. AI is changing everything. But you know what? we survived the player piano or the printing press. We'll survive AI if we keep our minds open about the fundamental ideas about getting along with people in our societies. So I'm an optimist, but it's because I'm I don't know, I'm an optimist. Maybe because I'm not a realist, I'm an optimist.
More questions? There is something on the chat. Let's see from Conrad. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I really like this distinction between automation and augmentation. And well, generally, I very much agree with the sentiment that it's more of augmentation that we need with respect to AI and current technological changes. However, one thing that bugs me is that even when you try to do augmentation and focus on augmentation, there may be still a risk of this sort of gradual degradation of an ability that is supposed to be augmented, but in time, through the augmentation, people may lose this ability to the extent that after some time you actually need to replace it with, well, an automated system. So in this context, do you have any recipe for something that one could call sustainable augmentation that does not lead to this sort of gradual degradation?
Yes, I do. When I ran a consulting firm, I would often, after 4 or 5 engagements that looked like they were pretty similar, I would basically deconstruct those things and make people analyze what they'd been doing in a really abstract way, and so that they wouldn't get comfortable with the solution. So I think in an augmentation versus automation situation, you can imagine that the system that is automating should occasionally stop and say, "Hey, let's change the tone a little bit. Here's a practice question that's a little bit different than you've been doing so far. Let's sort of give you some different experiences to sort of widen your experience base and open up your eyes again to see the bigger picture." So the system could monitor you and say, "Are you basically paying attention as much as you?" I'm sure we could do like neural headsets that says, "Are you basically giving 100%? Are you doing it? Are you dialing it in at this point?" So if you get too comfortable, it'll stop and say, "Let me give you a refresher question or some other challenge that wake you up and make you go back to being, interested and involved again, paying more attention." So we can monitor attention and I think give you remedial interruption. I think that may be the solution. Interrupt you once in a while. Like again, cars do that. Tesla has some kind of thing that says if you are not paying attention, it'll wake you up and say, "Hey, pay attention. You're not paying enough attention." So I think the problem is solvable with some kind of attention monitoring thing. So you don't get too comfortable. I know you've done it a lot. Let's do something a little bit different for a while to make you get back on the attention plane.
Okay, so it's a sort of self-monitoring or continuous monitoring of the engagement, right? Or something.
Yes, I think that's the way to put it. Yes, you have to monitor the person's level of engagement and keep them engaged by disrupting their comfort from time to time.
Yeah. Any other questions? I know that there are probably many questions about one thing that is very much on a crossroad between psycholinguistics and organization and text in a company and in organization. So I'm going to ask you this question and ask you to answer as two people, as a psycholinguist and as Bob Glushko.
Okay.
And of course, the question about ChatGPT and how and the similar technologies which are entering big time our world and our lives. What's your take on that, Mr. Professor Glushko, the psycholinguist, and
okay. Well, it's really exciting from a scientific standpoint. There's a lot of interest in how clever can we be at the algorithms and about the training methods and all that stuff. But that's, you have to recognize that the technology is disruptive. And in particular, because my wife is a law professor who's one of the world's experts now on this copyright issues around ChatGPT. She has a paper in Science a few months ago and so on. And two, in the communication of the ACM in the last several months about this stuff. I'm very sensitive to these ideas about how does this thing affect people in terms of intellectual property, or does it disrupt their jobs? I mean, is ChatGPT a capitalist plot to destroy the working class, for example, of artists? Okay, I've heard that phrase before, and so we need to be sensitive to the fact that there are these two different perspectives, at least two endpoint perspectives, and the problem we have is that there are a lot of very naive people in, say, governments and in regulation, the European community, for example, who want to regulate before they understand things. And they're saying things which are totally stupid because they don't recognize either problem for what it really is. So I've been most amused by these proposals for how to deal with the training problem, where they'll say, oh, you used my picture in your training your model. I either am entitled to a royalty or you got to get rid of it from the model. Well, what is your royalty if you have your 1 billionth of the training data? We'll give you a penny. I mean, that's impossible from a transaction cost standpoint. So you can't, there'll never be a solution that way from transaction cost. On the other hand, take me out of the model and retrain. I'm going to retrain the model whenever someone complains. That's infeasible from a training standpoint. So we have a lot of stuff to figure out. And that what we need to do is basically, chill for a while and not overreact. So just let's explore the technology. Let's explore these other issues about the people, the social things, but let's not overreact for a while. Let's take some time to figure this out. It's too easy to overreact and look good, but one of the problems we have is that our politicians like to say, "Oh, we passed these laws or passed these bills," and they think they're done. Implementation is the hard part. How can you build a system that actually deploys this in the real world, that actually does what it's intended? Hey, that's somebody else's problem. I just wrote the regulation. I'm done. So we have this cultural problem where people who are looking at the problem from the legal standpoint are so disconnected from the actual deployment standpoint that they're going to cause some bad things if we don't stop them. So,
but as a psycholinguist, were you amazed at the?
Well, okay. As a cognitive scientist, okay, I can look back and say, we made a lot of progress since 1979. Okay, David Rumelhart was the first to use back propagation to train a neural network. Jeff Ellman was the first to invent recurrent neural networks. Yeah, the vector's bigger and we're training more stuff at the same time, but we're just doing, it's incremental, I think. I can look at this and see an incremental pathway from 1979 to 2023. I mean, so are they big breakthroughs? Yeah, if you haven't been paying attention for 40 years. But there's been a lot of progress over 40 years. Don't get overreact to this week's big news. It's been coming for a while. Again, the vector's big now.
Yeah.
Fine, it's big. It's still some of the same question. What should be in the vector? How do you train the vector? But, we're still doing stuff we started off doing in 1975 with Rumelhart and McClellan and stuff.
The underlying mechanisms are those, you're right. Any other questions? Yep. Satya.
Hi.
No.
Hi, Mr. Bob. I have a question regarding to one of your experiences. So after your PhD in cognitive psychology, when you moved to the industries, could you say a little bit about how the transition was?
Well, again, like I said, the transition to Bell Labs was really easy because it was practically a university in disguise. We had a bigger faculty than the University of California system had. There were PhDs there. There were thousands of PhDs at Bell Labs. So it was from an intellectual community, it was very much like a university. The only difference was, instead of having to get grants and publish papers, we can publish papers if you want to once in a while, but basically your job is to solve problems and prevent problems. So it was the fun part of an academic job without any of the bad parts, like writing grants. Mm-hmm. So it was pretty easy transition. Only problem was when they broke up the Bell system, it was all of a sudden, we have to make money. I go, I don't know how to make money. I'm used to doing fun things and solving interesting problems. And so there's a real kind of existential crisis about what will Bell Labs do when it doesn't have anybody paying its bills? Because literally, I mean, when I went to Bell Labs in 1979, it was a monopoly, like Google's a monopoly with too much money. Okay, they said to me, "Well, we make a lot of money in the Bell system because we have a monopoly. All the phones in the country belong to us. But we have to, we have to be kind. We can't make infinite profits. We have to spend money and not give too many dividends to our shareholders. So we have to spend money at Bell Labs to spend the money." So I'm 26 years old, and they said, "You should go to a conference and have the limo come to your house and fly first class and take your friends out to dinner every night." It was like ridiculously nice. So it wasn't a hard transition to go to Bell Labs. The transition after that were much more different in terms of the economic quality of life. They didn't pay me to fly first class when I was in the next jobs. So, but the first job transfer was very easy because Bell Labs was a unique situation. It was the best place in the world to do applied research, for sure.
So this is kind of a condition which some people call relaxed selection, that you don't have to run to earn money to I don't know, fight with current obstacles, but you just have time to sit down and think about solving the problems. And so do you think there is any other company right now which has this?
Well, for a while, Google had this idea that you're supposed to take 20% of your time doing whatever you wanted. That's going away. DeepMind used to be like this. Now DeepMind is becoming much more productized. So there was a moment when Google was like this, but it's gone. I think it's gone. I mean, companies find they can't afford to do all the massive development now and still do pure research. Pure research is disappearing from industry in that sense. So,
but is the university such a place still?
Well, yes, but it comes down to funding. So, and I think the solution is probably going to be, and this is one of my crazy ideas, but we need to get better at having university and industry work together on research. So it would be great if instead of saying, when you finish your PhD, you're a postdoc, can you get a job in industry? And they want to try to hire you then. Maybe they should say, hey, first-year graduate student, where do you see yourself on that spectrum of jobs 5 years or 10 years from now? Are you going to be in research, applied research, development? Where do you want to be? And if you say, I'm willing to take it, I'm interested in the real world, then they may say, well, here's some project we would like to work on. We'll fund your PhD if you do these projects. It's research, but it has some interest in us in the long term. So more of a partnership rather than a rivalry. So I'm trying to come up with some ideas for industry funding of pure research in kind of a mentorship kind of thing.
Right.
And better matchmaking. Right now, when students go to industry, it's like, well, I found a friend of a friend who worked at Google or DeepMind, as opposed to maybe there should be a system that finds people and matches them better. So in the United States and in England, I think as well, in Canada, when a person finishes a medical student training, the government helps find you your first residency by matching you to some appropriate place. Imagine if there was a matchmaking registry for cognitive science and AI. Here are a bunch of jobs that we want to do in industry. Here's a bunch of people that have skills. Can we find the optimal place for you to spend your time based on what you did as your PhD research?
Yeah.
So I'm not giving up. I'm still hoping we can solve these problems.
That's an idea. We just have to send enough people to recognize the real world problems solvable by cognitive scientists. And
yeah, so I'm hoping to do a workshop at the Cognitive Science Conference next year, and maybe even have a one-day workshop that says, we'll bring in venture capitalists and people like that saying, how does the system of startups and venture capital work? To teach people want to learn about that, a PhD student can go and learn how venture capital works. How do you get funding? Things like that. And then the next day would be more like, well, here's the research question the industry has. Can we do some matching with, so like 2 days of like workshops, one which is much more like practical and one's more the research transition, but 2 days would be really nice to have together. That's my current plan.
The next conference is in Rotterdam, so not far from, it's
easy.
Like from state to
practically
state.
A hitchhiking ride from Warsaw, isn't it?
Yeah, almost, right. I saw a question by Kasia Koprowska, but I don't see Kasia anymore. Was she?
She's still there.
Yeah, Kasia.
Yes, I'm here. I guess I had some troubles with connection. I'm actually asking about jobs, because your approach kind of underscores the need to be flexible and stack up different kinds of expertise. But like our society is still very much focused on the specialization. So I would like to ask you for your advice how to look for opportunities that would actually value this multidisciplinary approach and how to recognize these opportunities.
Okay. Well, I want to say choose your advisor carefully. Some advisors say, you know, I think you're smart. I want you to do your research in my lab and do interesting stuff that's good research and so on. Other advisors say, here's my grant. I want you to spend the next 4 years banging out things very narrowly focused in my research area. And so, of course, the second type is we would be much less helpful at developing abstract skills and abstract perspectives on science. So, you know, find a place where you can do that kind of abstraction. They're out there. You have to just sort of make yourself do it. Again, it's like, you know, are you better off doing 10 trivial variations of your dissertation to have a lot of publications, or doing 2 or 3 really substantive different projects that are in different areas that are complementary? I mean, the first one, fine, might get you your first academic job, but the second one will get you your best career. So you're making choices, you know, again, especially now in an era when people tend to do more postdocs than go right to an academic job. I think you have a chance to say, let me do 3 or 4 different kind of postdocs that are very different, so I get different experiences rather than the same thing for 5 years. So again, you can choose how to describe your experience. You can even write the same paper with different for different journals and spin it different ways to make yourself think differently about the problem. I hope that was helpful.
Carolina?
Yes, hi. Thank you for the fantastic lecture. I wanted to ask about your research interest. So especially at the beginning of your career within such a broad and fastly developing field, how did you decide on what you want to focus?
Oh, my PhD research, which is my best cited paper of all time, was I just, you know, reading. The sort of common sense about reading was that in English, you read by 2 mechanisms. You look up words that you know, or you sound them out. But that had this logical problem for me that said, how do you know you don't know the word unless you look it up? So how do you know that you should sound it out? And I basically sort of said, that means we're teaching reading all wrong. Sounding out is not a method of reading, it's a method of discovering words you know from speech. So you have to learn how to sound words out so you can recognize that you already know the word. And so my thesis basically showed that there was an interference effect, so that a word like in English, like TAVE, or a word like, MAVE, you say mave in English, but sometimes you say math because have gets in the way. But if you're using rules, have shouldn't get in the way. But because you're activating knowledge at different levels of abstraction, have gets in the way. Now that interference effect shows that you're not using just pure rules. And that I basically got interested in problem of, well, how does this affect like teaching reading? I mean, it really has an effect profoundly. And so I really wanted to have a job which was more applied, which is why when this chance about getting an applied position at the University of Texas, I jumped at it. I wanted to be an applied phrenologist and study reading and literacy. Instead, I went to study, you know, technical literacy for repair guys at Bell Labs, but it was still the same kind of applied problem about how do you make good use of technical information that you have to read to make sense of.
I think you have another question. Would you like to come? Here you will be.
Hi. I wanted to ask you that, you know, science, technology, and innovation requires, you know, a greater level of cognitive capability. So I think as a human being, when, you know, we started our journey, so we almost everyone has more or less same sort of cognitive capacity, which, you know, separate us from the other species. But eventually, at this point, you know, if I see around the world, you know, some people think about our natural world, physical world, social world differently. For example, those who are living in a democratic world, those who are living in a theocratic, undemocratic world. So they think in a different way, every aspect, whether it is climate change or science, technology, innovation, etc., etc. Do you think that, you know, freedom and kind of environment people live, it plays a very key role in the way you look at the world. So if I see the part of Asia, Africa, and Middle East, the way they think about the world, I seems that their cognitive capacity has changed. I don't know whether it is a natural phenomena or it has impacted their genetics also, or it's going to be impact their genetics also in the coming days. So this concept called neuroplasticity, I don't know how this is working in their mind,
Oh, stop. This is way out of my depth. I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm not a evolutionary biologist or anything, but I do think that there are differences in how you look at the world, and of course they'll be sustained culturally over time. So, I mean, when I joked about the students not knowing the names of trees, I said we know a 4-year-old in Ecuador can name 100 trees. Boy, you must feel stupid. And then they'll feel bad for it, and they hold their heads like this for a while. I feel stupid. I said, okay, here are 10 fast food restaurant names. How many can you name and distinguish? And they can tell the difference between Burger King and McDonald's, okay, and Taco Bell, okay. Whereas the kid in Ecuador wouldn't know the concept of fast food restaurants. So it's not about it's not instrumental for them. So yeah, but over time, these habits of noticing certain things will of course be incorporated. They may have some evolutionary value, but I think people are more alike than different, and that their environment will basically just select for different things. I hope we're more alike, but again, that's not I'm not really speculating about evolutionary biology. That's not my thing.
Yeah, maybe a more pertinent question related to your problem is that is the question, how can we make people who have really different categories and different backgrounds talk to each other and understand each other and recognize some of the common problems that we have, and that's probably something that we
Oh no, now we're talking about Trump and Biden. Oh my God.
For example,
I mean, blue states and red states and things like that. It's
yeah, but they have to talk to each other.
No, again, we have to solve these problems because we have problems we have to solve. We have to solve things like climate change and things like that, and population, and viruses. And we have to be able to work together as a species. And except that we can't. We live in our bubble chambers. That's a problem. So again, I've been doing some. I have a friend who's interested in the problem of loneliness. So how do people develop better social network? Loneliness, being lonely, not connected. And we have a problem that we tend to glorify people that have a lot of followers more than we have people who have a lot of connections. So we should change that. We need to change the culture. We should value Taylor Swift less, and people who are gatekeepers between depth social networks more. So I'm not sure how we do that, but we need to find ways to maybe to have. I mean, I've been thinking about the idea that I have a one of these like sensor rings called the Aura ring that tracks my sleeping and my awakening and my activity and so on. I'm thinking, could there be a version of that tracks your social graph? Imagine if, as you walk down the street, you get a buzz saying, someone in your social graph was a block, but go have coffee with them. Okay, to reinforce your connections. Okay, that'd be a good idea. We get people to be, or someone who critiqued your last paper, but you go talk to them. Okay, in the faculty lounge. Okay, but again, to have sort of a way to automate more of this engagement at the intersections rather than just pure followers. So that's one of my thought experiments for a new company.
So getting us out of the bubble, right? So
yes, the company that says, let me use your social graph and automate it to trigger activities for you.
I think we are almost running out of time. We have time for a couple of questions. If you don't have one, well, Bob, we just had our government changed today. So in Poland, I don't know if you know about this, but today is 13th of December, which is as I explained to you, and you maybe remember the date of the martial law in Poland in 81, but also today we just had a change of our government and the new government was established. So I know that the relation of the government to science and industry is different in the States than in Poland, but if you had one advice to our new government, how to manage the relation between university and entrepreneurs and industry, what would you say to our new Minister of Higher Education and Science?
I think I'd tell them to be more profligate and invest more in innovation. Because right now, Europe is overregulated on regulation, on technology, and I think they're stifling companies. So there's a reason why all the startups are in San Francisco and Boston and New York. It's because the government isn't in their face all the time. Whereas there's such a tendency in Europe to overregulate things from the beginning, it stifles things. So I'd say get out of the way. I'm sure there are people in this room that are very smart. They can start companies tomorrow that can get the government out of their way. So get out of their way.
Okay, that's for the entrepreneurs. And for scientists?
Get out of their way. Give them more money. Don't make them spend all their time getting grants. Seriously, I mean, I heard that people spend half the time getting grants. That's ridiculous.
That people what?
Spend half the time looking for grants.
Yeah, that's
so
true.
Let them do science. Let them not do grant writing. Let ChatGPT write the grants. That's it. ChatGPT can write the grants.
I'm afraid half of them are written by ChatGPT. All right. Do you know the percentage of gross national product that is devoted to science in the States in the budget?
I have no idea. It's less than it used to be by a lot. I know that.
The problem in Poland is that we used to have 0.87, and right now we have maybe 1.5%. Whereas in Europe, on average, there is 2.5%. So we are way below the financing of science.
I'm worried that a lot of money right now is going here. Not that we shouldn't, but that's a lot of money going in the world right there. And we have to do this. But it's taken a lot of money out of a lot of other places. And so while I want to say spend more money on science and Slava Ukraini, we got to save Ukraine.
Yep.
So.
Okay. So yeah, and please, we heard that Zelensky was just there, right, in the U.S.
Yeah, I know. I'm not sure it went very well either. Yeah.
Can we talk some reason in?
No. I want this not to be.
Yeah. Okay, so yes, fingers crossed for Ukraine and for people not to get used to the war, which is the most horrible might happen.
Right.
And I think this is the right message to our Minister of Education: more money to education and less time spent on grant writing, but just
get out of their way. Let them do their work.
Out of our way.
Right. One last thing. So I assume that someone in this room is going to win the Glushko Prize this spring. Make sure you let me know, okay?
Yep. Okay. Yes. Okay. So let's limit the prices for those people who are here.
That's fine. Okay. That's fine.
No,
okay.
let's not limit
it. And offline, of course.
Yes, offline, but there are also in linguistics, they are doing also cognitive aspects
anywhere.
of linguistics. So let's
anything you call cognitive science is fair game.
Yeah.
Anything you call cognitive science is fair game.
Well, I would like to thank you for your inspiring, very inspiring talk, really. And I have a very short question at the end of your presentation. That for example, as a researcher in academia, which research area now in broad cognitive science you will take into consideration, for example, for you, so to take a deeper look, to explore which subjects you think that they are very promising in cognitive science?
Well, I know what I'm interested in, which is that I spent a lot of time around 2010. I got involved in service design for a while, looking at what I called substituting information for interaction. Where I had this nice slogan that says, I can either interact with you in sort of a user interface way to find out what you want to do and all that, or I can predict it by having a better model of you. And that trade-off is underexplored. It's like we should have a more systematic way of doing that trade-off between information and interaction. okay? And I did some work on that for several years. But then I got interested in this problem of organization more broadly. And it's really about how to think about organization in this most abstract possible way. So I say, organizing is, I can organize anything if it has the right questions. What are you trying to organize? Why? By what principles? And so on and so on. And I was like trying to develop a repertoire of organizing principles. So I teach 10-year-olds, look, you can organize by their look, appearance, by their some date that's associated, the creation date, the acquisition date, their name, alphabetize them. So these give them a repertoire of cognitive structure. And that's actually been pretty fun to teach kids who are 10 to think in this more abstract, generative way. So again, I'm trying to bootstrap this generation of kids that are looking at their phones too much to be more aware of structure in the world. It's been my latest project. But if any of you have any 10-year-old kids in your life, you should look at my book. It's freely available on the Berkeley website. You can download it and see if you can learn about organizing stuff. So again, the first paragraph of the book says, hey, you came to school today. You walked, you took a bicycle, took the bus, you got to school somehow. How'd you make it? Well, because there are crosswalks and bike lanes and stop signs and street lights and things like that. And you never noticed it before because it works. You only notice it when there's a traffic jam or the light doesn't work and there's chaos. But most of the time the world's organized, you just never bother noticing. So start paying attention to the world and organization. You'll be a more effective person.
I will buy your book because I need to, organize my research.
No,
life,
it's
so
free.
It's
free. Your book
it's
is
free,
free.
open access. Oh, sorry. So I will download it for
It's
organizing a researcher life, or
You got
academic life,
You got
or
it.
science.
It's there.
I think it was a very, very good answer also, and a very good question and a very good answer, because we started this meeting by saying that we keep thinking about cognitive science as a conglomeration or just a set of different disciplines. And Bob's answer actually was no, this is a cognitive science. It's a science of organizing, the science of information flow, right? Of systematic.
Yes, the science of making sense.
It's the science that we probably should.
It's cognitive science is the science of discovering or creating structure in your experience. Done.
Ta-da! Okay.
I really enjoyed this. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, and I hope that next time we will see you in Poland. Maybe, Rotterdam is so close to.
I like that idea of getting to Poland at some point. Yeah.
So let's keep this in mind, and by that time, I'm sure your prize will be established, and maybe you will get a chance to hand in the first ones. Let's plan for that.
Okay, we'll see. All right. Well, if Lech Walesa comes to visit me, I'll come do it.
We try to do it close to Rotterdam.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
You are always invited, yes, to Warsaw.
All right. Okay. All right. Bye-bye.
Always invited, yes. Bye-bye. Ciao.